and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuel. It is now 9:08 p.m. in a very dark, grey, gloomy city of Budapest here in Central Europe. The days are always short, and the evenings are long, and there's often little else to do other than to drink, which explains the high level of alcoholism in this part of the world. Even worse, the high levels of suicide. However, on a more cheerful note, thank you very much, everybody who has joined me. I really appreciate it. And it is, yes, it is 3:09 p.m. on the east coast of the United States. And I guess the big news, and there's quite a lot of news generally, but the big news of the day is the fall of the Serbian Prime Minister Vučić, not to be confused with the President Vučić, who has resigned after a very extensive series of protests and strikes against him in Serbia. Now, what's striking, of course, is that the Russians, and of course some members of the alt media, have been trying to make the case that Vučić is being subjected to a color revolution. And of course, it's reasonable to think in those terms because the first of the color revolutions did take place in Belgrade in the fall of September 2020. No, sorry, it's not 2020. God, it's longer ago than that. It's in September 2000, following the election of Slobodan Milosevic, and basically the massive operation by the Western powers to get Milosevic out, and clearly Milosevic was not prepared, not ready for that onslaught. The Russians, as always, were also ready for the onslaught, and he succeeded. I mean, they got him out. It didn't wholly succeed because clearly the plan was to kill Milosevic. I mean, that was obviously that was the goal of the color revolution. It wasn't just enough to overthrow him. What was most important was to have him killed. You know, they needed to do the Ceausescu model in Belgrade. Anyway, that was the first, and then of course this operation was repeated elsewhere in very short order. There was the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2004 that stole the election. Yanukovych had clearly won that election. It was a two-round election. Yanukovych won it, but lo and behold, the president who came out of the color revolution was the West man Yushchenko. And then, of course, we had the color revolution in Georgia, and then in Kyrgyzstan, and in Lebanon. And each of these cases, the regime change operation installed a pro-Western puppet regime. And remember, in Georgia, they got Saakashvili, Mikhail Saakashvili, who replaced another actually pro-Western figure, Eduard Shevardnadze. So it's understandable why people would think, oh yeah, look, there's all this turmoil, massive strikes, protests in Serbia, and particularly targeted at Vučić. And Vučić, if everyone remembers, though he's not a member of Serbia's Socialist Party, he's a member of Serbia's Progressive Party. That was the party of Vojislav Šešelj, but he was a member of the coalition government in 1999 and 2000 that had fought in Kosovo and that fought off the NATO bombing of 1999. And if you recall, and this is an even more intriguing story, Vucic, who was the Minister of Communications in the Milosevic government, he was scheduled to be interviewed at RTS. He was scheduled to be interviewed by Larry King. Larry King show on CNN. In those days, Larry King was still alive. B, he was still working at CNN before Larry King um, went over to work for, kind of what was a nonagenarian Larry King went off to work for RT, huge scoop, huge uh, grab. We've got Larry King. Anyway, um, he was supposed to go to be interviewed um, by Larry King, and he was on his way to the RTS studio because that's where the CNN carried out its broadcast. And he that it was on that night, on that very night. This was I think April 23rd, 1999. NATO launched its devastating attack on RTS, in which 16 people were killed. Not journalists, but all 60, production people, makeup people, and so on. 16 people were killed. And so Vucic was scheduled to have that interview with Larry King just as NATO bombed the RTS studio. So the real question was, but for some reason, which has never been explained, Vucic cried off and said he wasn't going to do the interview. And now we don't know if the full story. The full story. No one has ever explained that. How it was that CNN and Larry King had scheduled an interview with the Serbian minister of communications just as NATO was attacking the RTS studio, during which exactly at the same time as the interview was supposed to take place. And because, let's keep in mind, NATO had been threatening to attack RTS for some time. NATO had claimed that RTS was Milosevic's propaganda machine. This is the early version of Putin's putrid propaganda, Putin's poisonous putrid propaganda. So this was the RTS that's no journalistic outlet. It was part of Milosevic's propaganda machine. So they attacked the RTS studio that night. And I would have thought, though I have no evidence for it, that NATO was planning a very, a spectacular, the attack to take place just as the Serbia's Minister of Communications was giving an interview to Larry King. It would be wonderful television, a big scoop for Larry King at CNN, and Vucic called off, and no one really ever investigated further what really happened there, and why did Vucic call off the interview at the last minute? So did somebody tip him off that he was likely to be killed? And so it was almost no serious journalism investigation was undertaken about RTS. The RTS episode was itself very interesting because I said NATO had been threatening to bomb RTS, and for some time on the ground that it was Milosevic's propaganda machine. And when the bombing took place, and there was a little bit of an embarrassment, because after all, you killed 16 people, 16 civilians. You killed makeup people, editors, cameramen, this is not exactly a military target. And then Tony Blair justified to say, well, yeah, again, these aren't journalists, this is propaganda. The problem NATO had um, was that whether you regard RTS as journalists or as propaganda is neither here nor there, because it's still a civilian target. It's not up to Tony Blair, and it's not up to Essie Dillon themselves. RTS, yeah, I should have said RTS is Radio Television of Serbia. Yeah. Whether you regard that as uh, doesn't matter. It's still a civilian target, and therefore NATO pretty much realized, we have a little bit of a problem on our hands, because we kind of hit a civilian target and deliberately hit a civilian. We targeted something clearly civilian. So what then happened was an amazing tour de force of switching the in terms of who's the victim and who's the perpetrator. And apparently, it wasn't NATO that was to blame. It wasn't NATO that had just bombed RTS and killed 16 people who was just some civilians. No, 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 no. The people who were to blame, leave aside all the business about the propaganda and everything, the people to blame were the leadership of RTS. And why was the leadership of RTS to blame? Well, because NATO had issued warnings. NATO, hey, we told you we were going to bomb you. You didn't evacuate the building. Now, had NATO said, we're going to bomb you at 3 a.m. on such and such a date, so it's probably a good idea that you evacuate the building. Okay, but you could do that. But that's not what NATO claims. We've been saying for weeks we were going to attack RTS. And the RTS leadership had done nothing to evacuate the building. Therefore, who's ready to blame for the deaths of these 16 people at RTS? Well, who's to blame? RTS. They should have evacuated the building. See, the logic of this was so peculiar, because if let's say somebody comes to you with a gun in his hand and orders you and your family to get out of the building because he intends to set up a criminal enterprise in your house, and then you decide, I'm not going to do that. This is my house. I'm not going to be kicked out by a bunch of gangsters, and then they kill you because you wouldn't take orders. Who's responsible here? You for refusing to leave the house when ordered to do so by a gangster, or the gangster? And most people saying, well, no, I mean, you don't really have a right to go and threaten somebody to get out of his house, get his family out of the house, and if he refuses to follow orders, you basically kill it. I mean, but that was the logic of saying, no, it wasn't really NATO to blame. Who's to blame? The president of RTS. He's to blame for this. And then subsequently, after this color revolution that overthrew Milosevic, one of its first acts, one of this regime, the appointed regime, its first acts was to put on trial the president of RTS, because NATO needed absolutely somebody to take the blame. They knew that they had a problem on their hands. It was a serious issue that basically NATO deliberately targeted civilians. So yeah, it had to be. He was to blame, and he was sent to prison. Quite a considerable term. He was sent to prison for not evacuating the RTS building. So his crime was that he didn't follow NATO instruction. NATO told him, "Hey, we're going to bomb RTS. We're not actually going to tell you what time and which day. We're just saying we're going to bomb it, and it was your responsibility essentially to evacuate the building. And because you didn't evacuate the building, you are to blame for the deaths of 16 of your staff. So he's the person to blame." So that was one aspect of that. And again, I mean, I bring this up because Vucic was played an interesting role in that. And he never explained what made him decide at the last minute to cancel that interview with Larry King. No one ever questioned, what did Larry King and Larry King's producers know about NATO's imminent attack, and why did they so insist on having this interview with Vucic just at that very moment when NATO was going to attack. And then afterwards, of course, it was very interesting because when a number of lawyers filed a complaint against NATO, and they filed it with the ICTY. I see Dylan Dunn says, "Are we talking about 25 years ago?" Yes, we are talking about 25 years ago. It won't be very long, just a few more minutes. Then we'll get on to something more recent. I just think that we should just remember about Vucic. But anyway, the when they filed this complaint with the ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, to show that NATO had committed war crimes, they said, hey, the attack on RTS was a war crime by NATO. And Carla Del Ponte, who was the ICTY chief prosecutor at the time, she had a problem on her hands because they said you've got to open a criminal investigation. So I said, as Dylan says, Vucic, he's been around a long time. Yeah, no, that's right. That's when I first heard about Vucic. He was a minister. He was a young man, but nonetheless, he was a minister in the Milosevic government. And so when they filed that, they said, well, what about this attack on RTS? And Carla Del Ponte, who basically said, yeah, well, at least there's a prima facie case. That's all they were asking. There's a prima facie case that NATO had committed a war crime in attacking RTS. And therefore, it's incumbent upon the ICTY to open an investigation. And then they came up with this ingenious story for Carla Del Ponte. So, Del Ponte went to NATO and said, what the hell am I going to do here? On the face of it, this is a war crime. I have to open an investigation. You attack this clearly civilian target, whether they're propagandists or not. It doesn't matter. You attack the civilian target. What the hell am I going to do? And so NATO then told her, no, well, the reason we did it had nothing to do with the propaganda. No. I know that's what we said in public. It was about propaganda. No, nothing to do with that. What it was about was that the RTS was integral to Milosevic's communications and logistics system. It was part of his military machine, integrated within this communications infrastructure. That's why we attacked RTS. He did it because we were attacking Milosevic's communications infrastructure. Oh, neat. She said, nice. Boom. So she wrote this report and said, oh, no, it was all about the attack on the communications infrastructure. So it was a military target after all. Yep, perfectly reasonable. It was a military target. But there was always something very peculiar about that explanation, because if it was a military target, first of all, what did it achieve? You killed 16 civilians. RTS was off the air for a grand total of 3 hours, and then it was back on the air, carrying on as before. If it was such an integral part of the Milosevic communications military infrastructure, why didn't you attack it again? And that's really the point. They never attacked it again. So if it was such an important target, such a legitimate military objective, why didn't you do it again? Of course, they came up with this. They had to come up with this story. Otherwise, they had NATO dead to rights. They hit a civilian target. Anyway, back to Vucic. So ever since then, Vucic, and as I say, he wasn't a member of Milosevic's Socialist Party. He was a member of the Vojislav Šešel's kind of the more nationalist progressive party. And he, if you recall, after the overthrow of Milosevic, they inserted various, what they called the DOS, the Democratic Opposition of Serbia. So they ruled Serbia for a number of years after Milosevic, and they continued to call themselves DOS, even though they were in government year in, year out. They continued to be in government, but they were still the Democratic opposition. They're still in opposition, even though they were actually in power. Now, even at that stage, NATO, the EU wanted the Serbian government to deliver. They wanted, hey, we got you in power, we got Milosevic out. Remember, they also got Šešelj out. So Šešelj, because Milosevic was seized, kidnapped, taken to The Hague, and then he was imprisoned in The Hague, and then of course he died in prison at The Hague. Šešelj was a different case, because I think Šešelj in 2003 realized that he was the target of an assassination attempt. NATO wanted him assassinated, so he voluntarily surrendered to The Hague. This was before, in fact, the ICTY had even indicted Šešelj. So Šešelj went there and said, "Yeah, I'm here." So he was basically seeking the protection. Once he's in ICTY protection, NATO can't kill him. Anyway, he went there and was in custody for years and years and years. And Šešelj, they never really could come up with any criminal charges against him. And eventually, he was released, and he's back in Serbia. Now, again, nothing ever happened to Vucic. So, but Vucic was a part of this radical nationalist opposition to the NATO puppet regime that was installed in Serbia. But the problem was that the opposition, these characters, Koštunica, I mean, these are all names from the past, Koštunica, Zoran Đinđić, and then Boris Tadić, Vuk Jeremić, and they continue to rule in Belgrade, but and what NATO wanted from Serbia, of course, was recognition that Kosovo was gone. Kosovo had been taken away from Serbia, and Serbia had to accept that they had lost Kosovo. Now, the DOS had accepted a lot of things from NATO, one of the most important of which, and it was a very early concession they made, was that they accepted that Serbia is not the successor state to Yugoslavia. That was an important issue that Milosevic had insisted on since 1992, that Serbia and Montenegro, kind of the joint state, was the successor state to Yugoslavia. NATO said no, EU said no, but Milosevic continued to insist on this. But the new guys, this sort of Koštunica and Đinđić, said no, we're not a successor state. We are just one of the states that arose from the breakup of Yugoslavia, and that was an important thing. That was very important for NATO for that to do. And then the actual state, basically just dissolved. What was left of it, that's Serbia and Montenegro. Again, that was the next thing. Serbia just accepted the dissolution of this union between Serbia and Montenegro. Anyway, the problem was that it was Kosovo, and those people, there's Tadić and Jeremić, they wanted nothing more than just to sell out Kosovo. They wanted to be in good odor with Brussels, with Washington, to be invited to all the junkets, have a cozy professorship somewhere And no, but well, you said, yeah, we'll give you, you know, you'll have a nice time. All you have to do is just recognize Kosovo. Recognize that Kosovo is no longer part of Serbia. You've lost it. The people of Kosovo have voted to separate themselves from you, and that's it. That's all you have to do. And they said, yeah, yeah, we'll do that. The problem, the Serbs were not willing to accept it, and they just simply wouldn't do it. They would not accept the loss of Kosovo. And then I think it was yeah, it was still the Obama administration. They kind of came up with this ingenious idea that how are we going to get this? How are we going to get the Serbs to accept the loss of Kosovo? Well, let's put in the the sort of the right wing nationalists. Let's put in the people who had been part of Milosevic's structure. Now, these people were the nationalists. Milosevic had never really been much of a nationalist, but these people had been in alliance with Milosevic. They hated Milosevic because they didn't think he was sufficiently nationalist. So they said, okay, well, let's bring these people in above all the people who were associated with Shechel. So first was Nikolic and Vucic, and they will deliver for us. It's a sort of variant of the Nixon goes to China. These kind of liberal opposition types. They're not going to deliver for us. They're not. They're not. They're not. However much they're ready to sign off on Kosovo, they're not. The people are not going to allow that. So, but if we bring in the nationalists, they'll do it for us. And that was the reason why they brought in Nikolic and and eventually Vucic. And the hapless Nikolic and Vucic, who really weren't particularly smart, continued this. They sort of basically were promising that yeah, we'll deliver on Kosovo for you, but it's going to take time. We got to it's not easy with these Serbs. They're kind of a nationalist bunch, and that's the the basis of Vucic's hold on power. Now Vucic has been very clever because he, every, he's there's a very corrupt character. There's a lot of corruption goes on. Not liked, not at all popular. Um, but he, whenever he gets into political trouble, he always comes up with the same story, which is, I'm the victim of a color revolution. They're trying to overthrow me. The West is trying to overthrow me. They're trying to do to me what they did to Milosevic. And and obviously it's this is wearing a bit thin, particularly as he has shown on many occasions that he was ready to sell out on Kosovo, and is more or less sold out. I mean, he hasn't formally recognized an independence of Kosovo, but he was more or less accepted that Kosovo is part of a separate state. I mean, he'd done pretty much everything, all but recognized it as an independent state. But nonetheless, you know, uh, politically, this is his most effective tool, which is, that hey, I can't possibly be selling out Serbia. Why else would they be so eager to throw me out? Why else are they plotting a color revolution against me? You know, obviously, obviously, I'm really fighting very hard for Serbia's national interest. That's why they want to get me out. And the strange thing is that the Russians have been repeating this nonsense that Esse Delendam says Tomislav Nikolic. Yeah, that's the guy, Tomislav Nikolic. He was the head of the radical party. Um, um, and so, yeah, well, why else would they be trying to get me out? And then, as I said, the Russians have been Russian. Every time there are these mass protests in Serbia against Vucic, you can, Maria Zaharova immediately rushes to the microphone and said, "Color revolution, color revolution." They're trying to throw out Vucic. What's really curious about all of that is that Vucic hasn't done anything at all. Just as he's done nothing at all on Kosovo. He's done nothing at all to help the Russians. He voted against Russia on a number of the UN General Assembly resolutions on Ukraine, and he's clearly allowing Serbian arms. Serbia is still a big arms manufacturer. Serbian arms to make their way to Ukraine. He's been quite friendly to Zelensky, and he makes this really stupid argument that that somehow Serbia's claim to national integrity, the integrity of the Serbian state, including the provinces of Kosovo and Metohija, is exactly the same as that of Ukraine. Ukraine insisting on its 1991 borders, insisting that the territorial integrity of Ukraine, that claim is identical to Serbia's claim to Kosovo and Metohija, and that therefore Ukraine and Serbia are in exactly the same boat. Now, all of that is, of course, a completely absurd argument, because, of course, the creation of Ukraine was, always highly questionable. But the important thing was that the only way Serbia can make any claim at all on Kosovo and Metohija, and it can't really make too much of a claim because basically you've got NATO it's NATO occupied territory, is through Russia's support. Russia has insisted that the seizure of Kosovo, and it was seized. I mean, remember, this had really nothing to do with any national self-determination claim. It was based on NATO grabbing and stealing this piece of territory following a bombing campaign, grabbing it and saying, well, we're taking it, and that's all there is to it. And the only country that has done anything to push Serbia's legitimate claim on Kosovo has been Russia. So it's not a very good idea to then tell them that what Russia is doing is somehow in violation of its own principle, when this principle is being undertaken to protect Serbia's legitimate claims. So what happens here is that essentially Vucic thinks he's being very cute and presenting this argument on behalf of Ukraine, and somehow saying Ukraine, which is attacking the people on its own territory, which namely the Russians who are in their territory, is exactly the same as what he's doing. Now, the problem is also that gets him in good standing with NATO, but NATO, which absolutely insists on the territorial integrity of Ukraine, has no such compunction about insisting on the territorial integrity of Serbia. So you want to present your case and say, oh well, listen, I support Ukraine's territorial integrity, just as I hope everyone's going to support the territorial integrity of Serbia, and saying, well, no one's going to support the territorial integrity of Serbia, least of all NATO, least of all the people who are insisting on the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Um, so his attempt to get cutesy and thinking that somehow, well, he's enunciating some principle, a principle that no one anywhere in the world will advance on behalf of Serbia, with the exception of the Russians. And and of course Vucic has you know it's true that he hasn't applied sanctions against Russia, um, but he's gradually moving in that direction. But fortunately for him, he he has the Russians who, in return for nothing, continue to champion his cause. And it's understandable why the Russians might do that, because really Vucic is really the last figure on the European scene who is even remotely not on terrible terms with Moscow. But keep in mind, Vucic has not made any trips to Russia. He hasn't gone. He hasn't visited Moscow. While he has visited Zelensky, um, and so he so that was kind of a the interesting situation where he doesn't meet Putin, but he does manage to meet Zelensky. Anyway, so in the case of Vucic, the prime minister who resigned today, the um, the cause of his resignation was this horrific accident that took place in Novi Sad, where this concrete iron concrete canopy at the rail station collapsed and killed, I think, 15 people. Um, the problem was that this accident happened really just as this project was completed. I mean, there was a lot of money went into this project of building this canopy, and then I can't remember, within hours or within days of its opening, it collapses and kills 15 people. And the problem was, of course, is that Vucic, the outgoing prime minister, was the mayor of Novi Sad, at the time of the building of this canopy. Um, so you can see people are obviously very upset. Um, they and therefore, uh, this, given how little I think Vucic has accomplished, given I think these are very reasonable um, protests. Again, I mean, I'm as suspicious as the next man, more so, of color revolutions, student protests, strikes, and whatever. Yeah, obviously the West's behind this, and the West may well be behind this. There may well be a support from the West, um, but I think there's also legitimate grievances here. And again, you have to sort of remember, Vucic has been in very good standing with the West for quite a long time. He approved this lithium mining project, a German lithium mining project, very unpopular in Serbia, because it was believed that it would cause extensive pollution. So it was very unpopular. But Vucic delivered for the Germans. They wanted this. They want this lithium mining project, and Vucic delivered for them, even though there were extensive protests. So again, if you say, "Oh, these protests are a color revolution," that's what the Russians are saying. This is a color revolution. These people are protesting this mining project. that's being pushed by the Germans. So Vucic is on the side of the Germans, and yet there's a color revolution. The West is trying to overthrow Vucic. Why would they want to overthrow Vucic? I mean, he's approved this lithium mining project. So why would they want to overthrow him and replace him with who? The protesters who are against the German mining project. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So it's just that people in a kind of zombie-like way will say, "Oh yeah, color revolution, yeah, let's support Vucic." Um, so and again, over and over again, he's gone to these meetings with Sergeant Schultz and Emmanuel Macron. Bronson says approving that lithium mining project is unforgivable. I agree with you. I agree. So I don't think it's no color revolution there. Anyway, he meets these Macrons and Schultz, and they tell him, well, if you really want to join the EU, then and Vucic continues to say, we want to join the EU. We want to join the EU. That's our hope and dream. We want to join the EU. Where it says, well, if you want to join the EU, you have to do two things. And you know what those two things are? You have to recognize the independence of Kosovo, and you have to support our foreign policy towards Russia, which means you have to sign on to our sanctions regime. You've got to stop with all this, our historic friendship with Russia nonsense. And Vucic said, yeah. And he kind of agrees with this. And remember, they signed on to this. I think it was 2013. I think it was signed on to that ridiculous agreement with Kosovo about they're going to create these association of Serbian municipalities, and as the price of essentially recognizing the independence of Kosovo, Vucic signed on to that. And so there's no reason. No one could come up with a reason as to why the West would want to get him out. And the truth is, they don't want to get him out. That these protests, whatever, there may be Soros money floating around in some of these protests. There may well be CIA in these protests. That's okay. But I don't know that Vucic is exactly the hill you want to die on, supporting him. So he's gone. The prime minister's gone. Vucic obviously thinks that this is going to calm things down in Serbia. These massive strikes that are taking place now. But these things never calm anything down because, of course, the effect of throwing your prime minister overboard is, well, it's people smell blood in the water. Hey, we got the prime minister out. Now we got to get the president out, and so that isn't going to calm anything down. So we could see something spectacular coming up. Again, my view is that there's no need to go into battle on behalf of Vucic. If Vucic falls, he falls. There's no no need to weep tears for him. I think all the talk emanating from Moscow about color revolution is beside the point. So that's Serbia. And again, making these people out to be heroes, whether it's him or Viktor Orban, is really it's a mug's game. It's a fool's errand. Just like Viktor Orban, who's always, he makes perfectly reasonable statements about the Ukraine war, about the folly of EU policy. And he's the bad boy, the bad schoolboy at the EU. But whenever we get to the important vote, the key vote, such as what we had the other day about renewing sanctions on Russia, and he's always threatening. He's always threatening that that's it. He is going to withdraw his support for renewal of sanctions. He always, you know, changes his mind at the last minute and said, "All right, if you insist on it, I support it." So you know, as I say, it's a fool's errand, to make these people out to be heroes. I mean, they're all essentially creatures of Brussels, and there's no two ways about it. So that's Vucic. The other thing which I thought was kind of rather amusing was the confrontation between Trump and yeah, Sid Hillendum says something. They always say Orban is a Trump's ally or something. No, that's it. That's exactly right. They always do this. They always say, "Oh, he's either Trump's ally, or he's Putin's ally." He's always saying he's very close. He's very close to Trump. Trump was very close to Putin. They always say, and I saw an article in the Guardian today, um, and which says something like, "Well, Vucic is a very close political ally of Trump's." And I thought that's amazing. I have not heard that one. I have not heard that he was a close ally of Trump's. They just make this stuff up. It's just it's as a way of um, generating negative publicity. And again, as I said, um, Vucic, he gets a very negative press. He's hated, and and that's a kind of atavistic thing. People still remember back in the 90s when everyone hated the Serbs. There was an early version of the hatred for the Russians, and the Serbs were a kind of stand-in for the Russians. So there was the hysteria about the Serbs in the 90s, where the media were just foaming at the mouth about the Serbs and Serb leaders and so on. And so some of that is still persists in the media. And so, Vucic is universally reviled in the media. However, in terms of the leaders of the EU, they actually have pretty good relations with him. Let's say, he meets with them regularly. He's he does as much, if not more, for them as did the so-called democratic opposition of Serbia that was hoisted into power after the overthrow of Milosevic. So, yeah, that was now. The thing was that in the rather amusing confrontation between Trump and Colombia over the return of migrants, and I just find this amusing that there should be all this indignation um, about the United States acting in a very reasonable way. I mean, the fact is that whenever you're illegally present in another country, you're automatically eligible for deportation. Now, America really has a very serious problem with illegals. No one really knows. And this is quite shocking that no one really knows how many illegals there are living in the United States. They the media, of course, always insist, they always repeat this number about 11 million. There are 11 million illegals in the United States. The problem with that number, of course, is that it's been stuck at 11 million for about 25 years. I mean, it can't still be 11 million. So, that someone came up with that number. No one quite knows how they came up with that number. Um, and then it just gets repeated over and over and over again. Um, and so, oh well, there's 11 million, but the true number may well be much higher than that. And a realistic estimate has to be something along the lines of 30 to 40 million illegals. Now, Trump campaigned on the deportation of illegals in the United States. He said here, this was an explicit promise. There was no promise that he repeated more intensely and more frequently as that he will be conducting deportations. And so for Colombia to start protesting about that, saying that we're not going to take Colombian citizens, even though they've been living in the United States illegally. This was an argument Colombia was never going to win, and it's clear that that was the wrong hill to fight on. Of course, when Colombia, in response to Trump's threat of tariffs, so an Colombian economy that depends obviously on the U.S. economy, and the threat of tariffs is a very serious one. And then Colombia responded by saying, well, we will impose tariffs against the United States. He kind of made a fool of himself because the notion of threatening the American economy with tariffs, I mean, if you're Colombia, is obviously ludicrous. And that's why in no time at all, as was obvious from the start, Colombia would cave. And that was, I think, an important win for Trump, because it means that every other state that will try to protest about taking back illegals is going to say, yeah, we're going to do it. We're not going to go down this path of trying to threaten the United States that we're not going to take them back. Of course, you're going to take them back, and because you don't have any choice in the matter. You don't. There's no. You don't have a leg to stand on. Aristotle once says, I mean, I just noticed this, is that isn't Kosovo 90% ethnic Albanian in its population now? Is it legitimately salvageable for Serbia? Well, the answer is that, of course, that when other countries insist on their rights, they don't sit there thinking, well, this is 90% of that. Israel holds on to the West Bank and Gaza on the basis of a extraordinarily dubious historical claim. Some claim about the Bible, or some claim that the land of Palestine was entirely promised to Israel, which it wasn't. But nonetheless, since 1967, they have held on to this territory, which was occupied almost entirely by non-Jews. And even though they've moved settlers in there, it's still the overwhelming majority of the population of the West Bank and Gaza is not Jewish. And yet Israel continues to hold on to them and basically, just prevaricate and insist that, well, we're not going to just let these territories go until there's some kind of a settlement that we will find mutually acceptable. And so now 1967, that's now been 57 years since that has been the case. Now, what was the situation in Yugoslavia? Now, in Yugoslavia, um, some of the republics, chiefly Slovenia and Croatia, insisted that they were going to be independent, and that was all there was to it. They weren't going to bother negotiating. They were just going to be independent. We're leaving Yugoslavia. That's all. And what did the Western powers do? They said, "Oh my God, well that's it. We just have to let them go. I mean, we can't possibly, we can't keep the state together. These people, they want to leave." And so in the one case, in the Middle East, where Israel just holds on to territory in defiance of innumerable UN Security Council resolutions, territory that has nothing to do with the indigenous people who live in Israel. They're just holding on to this on some dubious biblical claim. The West says, "Well, we got to have a peace conference. We got to, let diplomacy work its way through." But in the case of Yugoslavia, they said, "Well, we can't have any diplomacy. We got to do it right away. We can't wait. We can't wait 5 minutes. It has to happen now. It's got to be done." And that's what they did in the case of Kosovo. So they said, "Well, let's see if we can work something out. Maybe work, some transition period, some kind of a federation, some confederation. We got some work out some sort of long-term resolution of this problem, because the alternative is we slice a piece of territory off another territory and we do it by force." And that's a very bad thing, because of course it's in violation of international laws, the very same international laws that the West supposedly adheres to. So when you say, well, it's 90% Albanian, so what can you do about it? Okay. Well, why is it that in other cases, the Western powers and the United Nations can step in and say, "Well, this is a long-term project. It's going to take time, a step-by-step process. We have to work through different constitutional arrangements so that, on the one hand, we recognize national self-determination. On the other hand, we have to maintain people's security. And we have to essentially also maintain international law, which means that we can't have forcible secession, unilateral secession. We can't forcibly redraw boundaries." But none of that was ever applied in the case of Serbia and Kosovo. So the question then is not ask about the 90%, but why was it that the West rushed to grab Kosovo from Serbia and made no attempt to resolve this problem in any diplomatic way? They do it in other cases, but they don't do it in this. So that's what I say, and that's why the whole notion that the only thing that matters in Kosovo is national self-determination. Again, national self-determination for the Albanians, but not for anyone else. But again, in the case with the breakup of Yugoslavia, it was sort of very interesting, because of course when they insisted on national self-determination, that was really phony. I mean that was a real con job when they insisted that somehow the Croatians, whoever the hell they are, the Croatians are entitled to national self-determination. You say, yeah, but you have a very substantial Serbian minority that lived in Croatia, and Croatia had been deemed a joint state of the Croatian and Serbian people, and therefore the state belonged to both of them. So when you say the national self-determination of Croatia, well, what about the national self-determination of the Serbs who lived in Croatia? And then some jerk then comes along, yeah, but that constitution was changed in 1990, and they changed the constitution and said, oh, Croatia is the state of the Croatian people. So therefore, the Serbs didn't really have any say now any longer in the determination of what happened to Croatia. Well, no, this was a unilateral step. If you have a state that is a joint state of the Croatian and Serbian people, that means you can't make any kind of a constitutional change without the approval of the Croatian and Serbian people. What Tudjman did in 1990 was he changed the constitution, he ignored the Serbs and said, oh, yeah, well, Croatia is the state of the Croatian people. But he couldn't do it. He had no constitutional basis for doing so because having ignored the Serbs in changing the constitution, he was basically acting unconstitutionally. So that new constitution that was created in 1990 by Tudjman was a lie. It was an entirely an unconstitutional act, naturally supported by the Western powers. Those same Western powers who now talk endlessly about this 90% of Kosovo is Albania. Anyway, that was that. So let's take a look at our the the Gagglers, on our locals page, the people who subsidize the the very important work that the dogs do here, and they're the ones who actually care for the lives of the dogs who basically do all the heavy lifting. Anyway, so Danoki says, so the big bully is back and carries an extremely large stick. Sanctions this, tariffs that, just ask Colombia, ignominiously caving after just 24 hours of defiance. But as I say, I mean, what do you expect? I mean, it's the same with Panama. I mean, when Trump says, well, look, we want the canal back. And as I said before, I mean, yes, the United States said, okay, we'll let the Panamanians run the canal. We're like that. We're very generous. We're a great power. We'll let them do it, and that's very nice, as long as the great powers put up with it, and until they get fed up with it. But there's always a good chance that a great power is going to get fed up with the situation and say, you know what, this canal, it's too important for us. It's the link between the Pacific and the Atlantic. We've got a Pacific fleet, Atlantic fleet. If we're in a war, we need to move military hardware, from one theater to another. We can't have somebody else controlling that canal. We can't, least of all the Chinese. We're going to take it back. And you can argue with that decision, and say this is really, really unpleasant, and it's bullying and so on. But ultimately, yeah, that's kind of the way it is. I mean, that's the way of the world. And just as I've said, in the case of Denmark, the United States is going to take Greenland. I think it's going to happen. I mean, it's just simply going to say, we need this. It's vital to our strategic interest, all part of our targeting of the Arctic, targeting of Russia and China, and we're going to make better use of it than Denmark will. And since it's us and we are the United States and we are the leaders of NATO, we are the leaders of the free world, we are the leaders of the West, we are the leaders of the transatlantic alliance, we are the leaders of democracy, we are the leaders of the rules-based alliance, we are the great and glorious leaders of the world. Whatever we do in Greenland will be to your advantage, your meaning Greenland, to Denmark's advantage. And Denmark doesn't have anything to say to that. Yeah, we're doing it for you. We've got the kind of resources that we can put into Greenland, and that's all there is to it. And it's all for your own good, for your own benefit. And I don't think they've got, Denmark's got much of an argument against it. I mean, any craven European power who's accepted cravenly what the United States has been doing for years as any basis at all for protesting. So hey, it's for your own good. This is for your own security. I think that's what the Americans are going to say, and Denmark will have to accept it. I think there's no two ways about it. And so that's okay. That's Colombia, and then Danaki goes on. When is the inevitable AI clash with China, and how long does Maduro have? Yeah, that I don't know. Maduro, they're going to target Maduro. I think with Maduro is going to be pretty much the Trump line, the one that he threatened against Putin, and the way he threatened, I think, Iran as well, which is we can do it the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. Um, and no question they're going to do that with Maduro. But we don't know how each of these is going to play out. I mean, Colombia obviously is so dependent on the United States. Colombia had to cave right away. How other countries, I think, have greater resources, and I think will obviously not succumb right away. But I have to say, if Russia doesn't like it, if Russia doesn't like what Trump does, and they don't like Trump's threats, they don't like all his blustering talk about sanctions or whatever. There's a very simple solution: win the war, get it done. Once you get it done, that's it. You've got it done. It's over. You've finished. You've completed the project. If you don't get it done, then you continue to be vulnerable to a Trumpian attack. A Trumpian attack. It could be an economic attack, or it could be a more serious, a strategic or a military attack. But as long as you haven't completed that war, you're vulnerable to Trump. So there's just no point. There's no point at all in complaining about what Trump is doing if you don't get the job done. I don't know. I've been saying this for 3 years. You got to get it done. You win that war. Once you've won the war, then there's nothing much Trump can do. Nothing at all. Then he can escalate sanctions, but it doesn't matter because the war will have been won. So that anyway. And then Maduro, and more importantly, who shorted NVIDIA stock before the DeepSeek results on Friday, and the ensuing bloodbath on Monday? No, I think that's a a very good question. Yeah, I am kind of interested in DeepSeek. I want to get it on my phone and see how it works. But I mean, I think it's it's an interesting. I mean, as always, I'm not buying the hype, but I'll wait a little bit on that one. But yeah, so I'm not buying all the hysteria about DeepSeek. But we'll see. And then Robert says, apropos of DeepSeek, the few DeepSeek reviews I've read present a pretty glowing picture. Yeah, that's kind of what I've read. I thought it's just way over the top. So this is the greatest thing ever. Puts Chat GPT to shame and so on. Take computer programming. One reviewer said he asked DeepSeek to develop both the user interface and the program logic for a data analysis problem, and damned if the thing didn't deliver flawlessly on both. Well, that's interesting. This is pretty wild stuff where computers can now program themselves. Does it lead to Oscar Wilde's notion of man finally free to live a life of cultivated leisure, or to something rather less pleasant? Do not buy that for 1 minute. I mean, Ever since I was a child, I've heard about these utopian scenarios whereby all the work and all the problems are going to be solved by machines, and we humans are going to be living this life of leisure and enjoying the arts and you know, you know, gardening and this perfect this perfectly utopian existence. It's not going to happen. It really isn't going to happen. As I say, this was first enunciated in the 1960s. That the problem is going to be this, and again, this was in the 60s. This was more than 60 years ago that there were thinkers, and all of the books were written about it then. That the real problem is going to be, what are people going to do? There's not going to be any work to do because everything is going to be done by robots. And in those days, they didn't talk about AI; they were talking about robots. And so people just be living this life of leisure. Get up whenever you feel like it, and all the work is done by robots. Was it Herman Kahn? He made the guy who was at the Rand the Rand Corporation. We were always writing these books about this. Everything was done by robots, and it never happens. And I can be sure. I mean, I'm not going to be around in 60 years' time when there'll be another one of these ideas about hey, what are people going to do? We're going to have 8 billion people, 10 billion, or 12 billion, or whatever the population of the world will be then, 12 billion people who don't have um, anything to do. What are they going to do? Are they going to live a life of leisure? They're sitting there reading novels and planting flowers. Isn't that how will people fill up their hours? And it's not going to happen. I'm absolutely certain that is not how the world works, and that just isn't going to, because that utopian dream from the 1960s that hasn't materialized. So um, anyway, thanks, Robert. Judy Hotchkiss, always very good to see you. Thank you so much, as always, Judy, for your generosity. Judy says, if we are serious about rapidly colonizing the moon and Mars, well, that's interesting. I mean, the colonizing the moon. I mean, we kind of went up the moon once, but didn't really find anything terribly um, appealing there. I mean, it didn't look like there was an atmosphere there that could sustain life. Mars is a different case. I mean, who knows with Mars? But at the moment, it doesn't look like it's going to be the temperature there at the very least is way too hot to sustain human existence. But anyway, if we're going to rapidly colonize the moon and Mars, then we won't just be lollygagging around. We just have to watch out for Hal. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I like the idea. I like big thinking. Like with Elon Musk, colonizing Mars. I don't think it's going to happen. As I say, I don't think there's anything to suggest that Mars, can sustain human existence. Um, but I do like the concept of obviously of space exploration and even sending humans to other planets. I mean, it's a very it's a bold, difficult enterprise, but it is um, like, that you have to admire that. Was it Trump who said something like the word? What is it? Our favorite word is impossible, because whatever is impossible, we deem to be possible. I can't remember. He says something like that. This is that the word we like most is that it's impossible. So I do like that. I do think that space programs and sending man into space, even though it was you had limit. It achieved a limited amount, other than America won the space race, or at least it was public. The public perception was that America won the space race. But nonetheless, it was certainly inspiring and exciting. And you have to keep in mind that um, those of us who were still alive in the great days of the Apollo program, then when Americans were sending men into space. Um, America acquired a huge reputation around the world. I mean, America has a reputation now, but these days, but generally for negative things. But back then, people admired the Americans. They may have thought, oh, we don't like what they're doing in Vietnam, but they did admire the fact that you sent men into space, and above all, that you sent men on the moon. That it was just an amazing thing to do. To send a man on the moon and to bring him back again. And it's still, when you look back on it, it's now, was it now 55 years ago that it happened. It's still an amazing feat. It's still a feat, incomparable feat in science and technology to be able to do that, to send a man on the moon and bring him back. So yeah, I'm all for it, and I kind of I do admire Musk in doing so. I'm skeptical that this is going to go very far. At least for the near future. So anyway, Mark's anyway. Thank you so much, Judy. Mark's 2023. I see that Volkswagen and Mercedes are willing to sell their plants to China. Lots of jobs going via third-party suppliers, around 540,000. It's a bloodbath in Germany. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it really is, and I think that the Germans have a real problem on their hands. It's getting to be they're losing any um, sense of being a kind of a major economic power anymore. They're just not an economic power. I mean, they're being completely obliterated by the United States and by the Chinese. And I mean, you could see this in the election. Maybe we can talk about that, because I thought Judy said something like yes. Judy also responded to Mark's 2023, saying Elon Musk just gave a video address to the AfD party. I did it over the weekend, where he told them that loving their country and pushing German nationalist interests. Yeah, I mean, he didn't say nationalist interests. He said national interests, instead of subjugating themselves to globalism, did not make them Nazis. No, that exactly right, and that's why I wanted to use your comment to address what Marx 2023 said, which is that Germany's just falling behind economically, and simply looking on Germany as well, that they have to go on wearing sackcloth and ashes. That's a real self-indulgence now. Because Germany could just simply, within 10, 15 years, could just disappear from the face of the earth as any kind of a serious country at all. Because even, in the aftermath of the war, when, from about, say, 1945 through to about 1970, people expected the Germans to wear sackcloth and ashes. But at the same time, by 1970, Germany was already back, or West Germany was already back as a serious economic power. By 1970, you think, okay, well, who are the major economic powers in the world? Obviously, the United States, the Soviet Union in a different way, as a kind of militarized state-run economy. But then Japan and West Germany, and therefore there was the expectation that West Germany will resume its role as one of the great economic powers of the world, as it was before the war. But now we're not even talking about that. West Germany could just cease to be complete West Germany. Germany could just cease to be irrelevant at all. Just it's just going to fade away. I think Musk's warning to the Germans is that you got to think really seriously about where you're going. And of course, then you have to look back, not just, well, how little you've done to support your industries, um, how little you've done to to power your huge export-driven economy. You've undertaken these ridiculous sanctions policies against Russia. You've shot yourself in the foot, shot yourself maybe in the lung, as Viktor Orban would put it, with your sanctions against Russian energy. Um, and then on top of that, you've got this open borders in which anybody can come in. So you've done nothing at all even to protect your own people, and this can't go on. Because at least back, as I say, back in 1970, there was at least the expectation, okay, we'll have all the sackcloth and ashes, and we'll say, yes, we're all very, very guilty, and we're all very, very sorry about Hitler. But now it's just self-indulgence. There's no one around in Germany, or hardly anyone around, who has even a living memory of World War II. And you're still feeling ashamed of yourself. You're still somehow, oh well, I'm really very, very sorry about being a German, even though my grandparents were already born after the war. So that's why I think it's important that if Germany is going to return to being a serious power, I mean, no one's saying Germany is going to be the number one power in the world. I mean, it doesn't have resources for that, but it has to be at least a serious economic power. Then they've got to stop feeling ashamed of themselves, and being ashamed of the Germans, and then stop feeling ashamed of themselves for wanting to restrict immigration. And so our friend Sergeant Schultz, after this horrific stabbing, yet another stabbing the other day from an Afghani man who stabbed the child to death, and then stabbed a man to death who actually tried to save the child. And then Schultz said, I'm really getting very tired of going to these commemorations of people immigrants committing these crimes. These immigrants who had asked us for protection, and this is how they repay us. And then the response has to be, yeah, but that's the point. For years and years and years, Germans have been saying, why aren't you doing anything to protect us? Why are you just bringing in all sorts of terrible people from the rest of the world? You're not doing anything to protect us Germans. So what, why have you allowed this to happen? Why, and then anybody who starts talking about Germany, German national interest, German culture, that we have to, essentially protect what is great about Germany, and that somehow, we have to shame when we can't possibly say that sounds like Hitler. And of course, it's absolutely ridiculous because Germany, the German people, German history, German culture have a long, long history. We're going back thousands of years. They've been at the heart of European history for thousands of years. German culture. This is the place where the Reformation was born. The whole notion that you can just sort of distill German history into those 12 years of the Nazis is ridiculous. And I think Musk, who after all, he's not particularly, doesn't know that much about Germany. I mean, he's a South African. So, but he said something that was important. Then you got to, are you going to be a serious country? Are you actually going to, try and go back to something where you were, or you're just going to fade into irrelevance? And that could happen. But in as I say, 15, 20 years, that's it. Germany could just fade away, of no real significance any longer in the world. It'd be completely overtaken by the various Asian economic powers. And so I think that was as I said. The Germans have to think about the greatness of their nation, of their culture, of their tradition. Not just simply think that Germany is just encompassed by those 12 years of the Nazis. Um, but Schultz, Sergeant Schultz, now here he was. He said that he attacked Musk for you know you know endorsing the Alternative für Deutschland party. And then he said, well, I believe in the freedom of speech, but I don't believe in freedom of speech for nationalist extremists. And then we have Friedrich Merz, who's likely to be the next chancellor, who said, I think the other day, that 1933 is enough for Germany. So, in other words, likening the Alternative for Deutschland, obviously, to Hitler, and then if you bring them in, Alternative for Deutschland into the government, it's like bringing Hitler into the government. These things are just so stupid. It's so dumb. And if Germany continues along those lines, because the Alternative for Deutschland doesn't have anything to do with the Nazis. But if you just keep saying that, then you're never going to solve the German problem, and it's in a very in a very obvious way. Let's say in this election, as February the 23rd, Alternative for Deutschland, it's likely to do well, but probably won't get beyond, I don't know, 22%. I mean, that 22%. Okay. So there is the wall that must be maintained against the AfD. No one must have anything whatever to do with them. That's the absolute dictum throughout the media, throughout the political establishment. No respectable person should have anything to do with the AfD. All right, so that's 22%. Okay, so therefore you're going to have to form a coalition government. All right, so the largest party in the after the election is likely to be Friedrich Merz and the CDU CSU coalition. This is that Friedrich Merz, the 1933 is enough for Germany. Okay, so he's not going to get more than about 30% of the vote. So that's 30%. So a little bit more than the AfD. Okay, so he said absolutely no. We're not having anything to do with the AfD. Absolutely not. He's a pariah. They are pariahs. We have nothing to do with them. Okay, so he has to form a government. And well, who's he going to form a government with? Well, it's obviously the Social Democrats, who are likely to come in behind the AfD. They're likely to come in with about 17%. Okay, so that you get you 17%. That still doesn't get you to the 15%, 50% that you need. So probably you're going to bring in the Greens, Annalena Baerbock, and all the Greens. So that's it. So that's the next government will be the Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, and the Greens. So they will take the place of Sergeant Schultz's Social Democrats, the Free Democrats, and the Greens. So it's a kind of Tweedledee and Tweedledum. You replace the Tweedledee by Tweedledum. That same Tweedledum that obviously doesn't have any means of solving Germany's problems. There's no means of solving Germany's immigration problem, because there's no way in the world the Social Democrats, in particular the Greens, that are going to sign on to any restrictions on migration into Germany. I mean, Friedrich Merz and even Schultz have promised vaguely that they're going to address the Schengen problem, that they're not just going to allow people to come into the country. But they're not going to do it. If they're going to form a coalition, there's just no way that they're going to agree on that. But it's a coalition, and they will have, said, oh, well, we've kept Hitler out. We've kept the Alternative for Deutschland out. Okay, they've done that, but that means the German decline goes on. It's just the same. It's the same thing, because Merkel also had these coalitions, these grand coalitions of Christian Democrats and Social Democrats. And again, you just weren't addressing any of the problems. You're not addressing your problem in Ukraine, whereby Germany is getting sucked into this war. In Ukraine, Friedrich Merz absolutely is even more hawkish than Scholz on the war. You're not dealing with your economic problems, because if you're going to have the Greens in, then you're going to have all the crazy environmental restrictions. That's going to be continue to be in place. So you haven't solved any problems. You've got no problems at all, and Germany continues with its decline. And then the question is, will Germans accept it and just essentially fade away from history? Fade. They'll be, just kind of a small country in Europe, as about as relevant as I don't know, Holland, or are they going to try and do something about it? And that's a question. So I have to think that in 4 years' time, after this election, 4 years' time, there might be change. It might be the Alternative for Deutschland will do something. And I think Musk is, I think, very smart, who kind of envisages, well, the change could come in Germany. And maybe the Alternative for Deutschland is that agent of change. Not this time. They don't have the numbers this time to break through into government. And given the wall that's been put around it, no one's going to have anything to do with it. But if you get another government, yet another failure of a government, which I think it'll be, with Friedrich Merz, Annalena Baerbock, and Sergeant Schultz, if once again you've got the same team in place, then you've got a disaster, and Germany can't go on like that. So I think it's important for him to say, yeah, you got to think about your country, your history, and everything that Germany has done, or just fade away, and then we'll just sort of gradually forget about you. So anyway, thank you, Judy. Marty, always very good to see you, Marty. Good evening, George and Gagglers. Good evening, Marty. Thank you so much, Marty. As always, thank you for all of your great postings. Always very humorous. Strongly urge everybody to read Marty's postings. DJ, always good to see you again. Thank you for your generosity, DJ, and also urge everyone to look at DJ's postings. He's very good with memes and with poems and with AI. Which I'm not good at any of those, so I'm always admire people who master memes, poems, and AI. So anyway, thank you, DJ. And then Aristotle one. No, thank you for your generosity. And Aristotle says, thanks for your incisive but empathetic analysis of the grooming gang phenomenon a few weeks back. Yep, thank you. It was so eloquent. I listened to it twice. Oh well, thank you. Thank you so much. It was I mean, it's really just horrific, and really, the whole phenomenon, I think, of allowing Western countries, I think, to be overrun by migrants and migrant gangs, and directing all of your rage, not at the migrant gangs, but at the people who express their anger and frustration at having been subjected to these gangs, and generally, the migrants and the various sex crimes who've been subjected to that. They are the bad guys, and I think, as I said, it was just shocking that back in the summer, last summer, when those three little girls in Southport were stabbed to death, and I don't know how many children were also stabbed and seriously wounded. Um, the Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, turned all of his rage against the public. Like, remember, the public, however inchoate their protests were, their hearts were in the right place. They were just very upset. I mean, as everyone is very upset when small children are murdered. It's a human impulse. They were outraged, and Starmer then unleashed this rage against the people who were protesting. Sent many of them to prisons. Many of them who weren't even out in the streets, throwing bricks or whatever, but because of their Facebook posts. And Starmer knew at that time, because he had been briefed by the police. We didn't know very much about it, so he had been briefed by the police. Starmer knew that this person was not just simply a Welshman, as the media put it. Oh, he was born in Cardiff, so that makes him a Welshman. So he knew perfectly well this was a person driven by a deeply a fanatical anti-white rage. And the people, again, however inchoate the protest, there were people who wondered, well, why was he in this country to begin with? Don't give us this thing that he's a Welshman, as well as Welsh as Richard Burton or Tom Jones. Don't give us that. Why was he in the country to begin with? And that's the point. The same with when Sergeant Schultz says, "Oh, I'm really getting very tired of these migrants coming in and stabbing Germans to death." Yeah. Well, a lot of people are very tired and say, "Well, why are they in the country? Why have they been allowed into the country? Aren't you supposed to be protecting the people in the country?" And so that was, and yet Starmer, knowing what he knew, I mean, again, he and they kept quiet about this person. Starmer gave no indication whatever of all the information that was at his disposal, and instead he starts throwing people into prison who were just simply upset about the murder of small children. And these people who were thrown into prison, they didn't actually hurt anybody. It's not like, well, yeah, you were upset, but then you went ahead and hurt somebody else, some innocent bystander, and therefore you need to be punished. They didn't hurt anybody. Starmer was just outraged by the fact that they were so angry and so pissed off. Um, I mean, I have to think. Starmer has to be one of the strangest figures in British politics. I was thinking that he kind of reminds me of Edward Heath. I don't. People probably don't remember him. It was a long time ago. He was the Prime Minister of the UK. A very, very strange person in all sorts of ways. You kind of wondered how a person so strange and so unlikable got to the top of British politics and got to be Prime Minister. Just somebody who's really deeply unlikable and deeply lacking any kind of empathy, deeply lacking any kind of leadership skills. It got to the top, and so Starmer kind of reminds me of Edward Heath. Anyway, thank you, Aristotle. And then DJ says the Red Scare has evolved into a MAGA hat in the closet. Okay, MAGA. Yes, thank you. And Robert, thank you so much, Robert. Thank you for your generosity. Says, on the positive side of Serbian politics, Serbian Deputy Alexander Vulin spoke out against the exclusion of Russia from the liberation of Auschwitz, saying 80 years later, the liberation of Auschwitz is celebrated with the participation of countries that organized the Holocaust in Auschwitz, such as Germany and its allies, or countries that provided guards, such as Poland or Croatia. Yeah, very, very good point. Um, there's no question. I mean, these people, some of these Serbs like Vulin and indeed Vucic himself, they say very sensible things, eminently reasonable and to the point, but then nothing happens. Nothing, there's no real follow up on that. And so um, you kind of, always, you're disappointed. Yeah, that is absolutely right. Um, and about Auschwitz. And like, I mean, we talked about it at great length um, during the live stream yesterday. It's an absolute disgrace, and of course, every country should be saying exactly that. That who liberated Auschwitz, and indeed who liberated most of um, East and Central Europe. Again, it was the Red Army. And it's, this is a you may not, you don't have to like Stalin, you don't have to like the communists, all that's fine. You don't like them, but nonetheless, it's a fact that it was the Red Army that liberated East and Central Europe, including the Baltic states, including Poland. It was a Red Army that powered its way into Berlin. The Red Army liberated Hungary, liberated Yugoslavia, liberated Romania, Bulgaria. Um, if you don't acknowledge that, if you don't, then you're just being fraudulent. You're being deceitful. You're lying, and that's why it was so disgusting when you have these kinds of commemorations like at Auschwitz, that you don't acknowledge this, and that you use these sorts of events to score political points. So you talk about all this solemnity and this pomposity of these events, but what you're saying has nothing to do with these events. You're trying to use them to score political points. The Poles, in particular, who are scoring these points. And again, as we talked about yesterday with where are we just yes where yeah okay um, yeah, as we were discussing yesterday, that that somehow this kind of these wars, if you're not going to be truthful about the how they how this war concluded, then you're just essentially sullying this memory. And in particular, when they say things like that, and this is at the Auschwitz Memorial, that somehow um, the Soviet Union and Germany together launched World War II, it's a lie. Soviet Union and Nazi Germany had a non-aggression pact. It was not a joint attack on Poland. It was a non-aggression pact, and Germany and Poland had a non-aggression pact. And Germany, and in fact, Poland was throughout much of the 1930s, from about 1933 on to about 1939, for 6 years, Poland had been seen as an ally of Nazi Germany's. And that's why, following the Munich Agreement, Poland took a slice of Czechoslovakia. It was an ally. It just so happened that Germany and Poland had a falling out because Germany was obviously going to raise the issue of Danzig and expected Poland to make the appropriate concession. I mean, hey, look, Danzig is a German city. Just give it back to us. But Poland proved to be obdurate and so on. But the notion that somehow, Poland was this was some innocent victim in the 30s is false. But nonetheless, this historical falsification just continues, and these events only add to the falsification. Um, anyway, Mark says the mighty French army are ready to defend Greenland. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I don't think Napoleon's Grand Armée is not going to march into Greenland. I don't. Yeah, don't think it's going to happen. It's just, I don't think anything's going to happen. I think the Europeans are going to have to. They will cave to the Americans, and they're going to, work out some kind of a transitional regime whereby America will de facto own Greenland, but they'll give Denmark some de jure control over it. But effective control will be that of the United States. That's if Denmark is lucky, if Trump is willing to make that concession. They just might not. They might just say, we're going to take it outright and turn it into an American protectorate. Um, but the notion of that Greenland, I mean, the Denmark or France or anyone is going to defy the Americans, that train has left the station. It's not going to happen. And then Robert says, apropos of Greenland and Trump spoke out in support of the 2005 Supreme Court case Kelo versus the City of New London, where the court ruled 5-4 in favor of the city's use of eminent domain to seize private property for economic development. Yeah, that was a very interesting case because, I mean, eminent domain had always existed. I mean, it stands to reason that in extreme circumstances, the government can take over private property. Obviously for fair compensation, but it's extreme circumstances, like where we need to build an air base here, and I'm afraid we're going to have to take over your property. We recognize this is your private property, but that's it. This is there's a state interest involved here. I mean, what that case, the Kelo case, what made that interesting was that the eminent domain issue was used in order to further a private agent. He was a private agent who wanted to take over somebody else's private property, and the court ruled in favor of the private agent. They said, yeah, I mean, it's like, hey, I want to build a shopping mall here, and these homes are in the way. And the court ruled, yeah, I think you should be able to build a shopping mall here. And they forced the private property owners to make the sale. So that case was quite shocking, precisely because they used eminent domain to advance a private cause. It wasn't to advance a governmental cause, but a private cause. Anyway, and then Robert goes on that score. Trump departs from the more libertarian sentiments of his base. Yeah, that's right. I think Trump was always a very much a newcomer, a Johnny come lately when it comes to libertarians, and so there's a lot of things that he's not at all libertarian. I mean, he's libertarian now in the case of Ross Ulbricht. He promised the Libertarian Party that he was going to pardon him or commute his sentence, and he's done that. Though he hasn't done anything on Julian Assange and Snowden, but nonetheless, he was libertarian there. But yeah, you're absolutely right. When it comes to the issue of eminent domain, he suddenly remembers, hey, I'm this big private property owner, and it's in my interest for government to advance my cause. Anyway, yeah. Thank you so much, Robert. And then DJ says, anyone interested in DeepSeek must watch this video. I was trying to download DeepSeek earlier today. I didn't succeed, but I'm going to try again later. But thank you for posting that video. Mark says, George, Russia is winning the war at the same time as they've demilitarized NATO, proved NATO to be weak. I see the OPEC are not playing Trump's game. Well, I think it's a little late now to get into it. As I said, Russia is not winning the war until it's won. I mean, there's no winning of a war. You either win or you don't win. Because we're talking about, I mean, we can talk about it at greater length next time. But when we come to these war of attrition, the best analogy is the case of Vietnam, because in Vietnam, Americans were also waging a war of attrition. They said basically the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese cannot possibly go on fighting against us. They're going to take such a hammering from us that they're going to have to give up. They just simply cannot go on sustaining casualties at this rate. They'll just cease to exist. And throughout, for year in, year out, the United States was telling us, we are winning this war. It was always, we are winning this war. We are winning this war, because, basically they're just taking such a pounding that they're not going to be able to continue. And of course, America didn't win the war. Russia has not won the war. Russia has been fighting a country 1/5 its size for 3 years and hasn't won the war yet. It's not even close to taking Donetsk. The key strategic sites in Donetsk, which is Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, have still not been taken. We don't know when they're going to be taken. So we're a long way away from that. And that's why I've been saying that Russia's position would be much stronger in dealing with Trump if it had accomplished its goal of taking, at the very least, taking Donetsk. But we haven't taken Kherson, and they haven't taken Zaporozhye yet. It could happen. I mean, I'm not saying it's not going to happen or anything like that, but they haven't done it. And when you haven't done it, when you haven't completed the project, then you're always vulnerable. You're always vulnerable to some changes in your adversary's position, and particularly with a kind of mercurial, unpredictable figure like Trump. So that's why I've said that things could get quite perilous now with Trump. Trump is not making any noises that he's willing to accommodate Russia. Had Russia done better, had Russia succeeded, so Trump's looking at it and saying, "You haven't done the job." Trump just respects winners. You haven't done the job. You haven't succeeded in defeating a power that's basically 1/5 your size. And therefore, I'm going to try and make life difficult for you. So that's why I'm saying it. Just simply saying, well, they're winning or they're winning. There's no winning in war. You've either won or you haven't won. No one's just winning. It doesn't mean anything to be winning a war. You either won or you haven't won. And Mark says Russia won the space race, America lost the space race and lost the arms race. I'm not sure about that. Not sure about that. And then Denaki says, apropos of the AI, and says, it's like the lady says, I want AI, the bots to do my laundry so I can have more time to do my art, not for the AI to do my art so I can spend my time doing the laundry. Okay, that's very good. All right. I like that. All right. So this. Okay, so Mark says, very strange, George, that with all the advances in technology, no man has been back to the moon, including Mr. Musk. Yeah. I don't know the answer to that. I know people have raised that issue, and I've heard many people raise that issue. And I don't know where you're going with that, but if you're going to whether you're going to suggest that they were fake, that the landings were faked. I don't know if that's what you're suggesting. I have my doubts about that the landings were fake, because if they had been, then the Soviets who were involved in the space race would have said they were fake. You did it in your backyard. The Soviets would know because they had satellites and they would be able to monitor um, the American space program. They would have been able to monitor an American flight to the moon. And they would have said, no, it never happened. We don't have any evidence that the Americans ever reached the moon. Since the Soviets didn't do that, and to the contrary, the Soviets congratulated the Americans and there was a very fulsome congratulation for a great uh, human accomplishment. And I have to think that it was real, that they did reach the moon. Why they haven't been back since then, I'm assuming that once the goal of beating the Russians to the moon, once that goal had been accomplished, they didn't really have anything particular further to do there. I mean, you've won this competition. What's the point of it? It's like, I mean, you won it. You've won this race. There's no point in running the race again. You won it, and then that's it. You're going to think about something else. So, and there was. I mean, it's not like the moon offered any rich soil or rich minerals or anything else that they can put to use. Anyway, so DJ says 1933 can't repeat itself because there exists no charismatic, informed leaders among the dribble that leads the EU today. Yeah, I agree, and in general, I tend to think, well, nothing ever repeats itself. I mean, it was a unique event. I mean, and when you think of this, a unique conjunction of events of the Great War, the shocking event of staggering loss of lives, and then the Bolshevik Revolution, which absolutely terrified everybody. These real brigands, these communist brigands, slaughtering en masse, butchering the Tsar and his families. Absolute terror that this created in Europe. The collapse of 4 different empires in Europe. Those unique circumstances then led to the rise of Hitler. The notion that that was it absolutely unique, unrepeatable. You just say this was unrepeatable. Nothing remotely like that has happened again, because those events, nothing remotely like those events, have happened again. So that's why the whole idea, oh, he's Hitler, that's Hitler, then this is stupid. And so Marx says, I see Orban caved again. Does he have any credibility? Not really. Not really. It's just he's better than the rest. I think it's like saying, okay, well, at least he's not Donald Tusk. At least he's not Kaya Kallas. At least he's not Ursula von der Leyen, or at least he's not Macron. And that's it. And you think, well, having set these kinds of low standards, you say, well, okay, well, at least he's he's not as bad as the others. Anyway. Anyway, it's apropos of Russia won the space race and so on. Judy says, maybe not the arms race, but thanks to SpaceX, America is the leader in space. Having a reusable heavy lift rockets that can land themselves back into launch position is absolutely the key. SpaceX is currently putting the lunar landing craft into orbit, ready to take the next step. You set up lunar bases inside the natural lava tubes on the moon and use lunar settlements to launch to Mars. SpaceX expects to launch thousands of heavy rockets per year, cheaply to both Moon and Mars. It's only the US doing it. Okay. Well, that's interesting. I mean, that's it is impressive. I mean, we'll see if it happens. I mean, I remember when the elder George H.W. Bush promised to do something similar back in 1989. So again, that was now 35 years ago. That never really went anywhere. But we'll see. We'll see if Musk will pull this off. So yeah, I'm open to that. I think it's quite exciting. I'm open to it. But as I say, we've heard this before. If you could look it up and remember George H.W. Bush making exactly that same promise. We're going to put a man on Mars. That was something that was his administration a one-term administration. We're gonna put a man on Mars. Anyway. Mark says, good to see Lukashenko was re-elected and keeps staple food prices stable and affordable. Russia needs to do the same. Couldn't agree more. Absolutely right. And then DJ says, apropos of the space program, one currently insurmountable problem is radiation damage to human from cosmic rays during transit. Okay. And then Judy responds, true, DJ, but not necessarily insurmountable. Cheap heavy lift rockets can carry heavier shielding. Also, there's great research happening in electrostatic and magnetic shielding technologies that deflect radiation without much mass. All right. I think it's very interesting. I mean, it's an interesting discussion, and maybe we can we can continue with it next time. Anyway, my time is up. So thank you very much, really, for a really interesting, very learned scientific discussion. Covered a lot of grounds. Thank you, everybody who stayed with me so late. Really appreciate that. We will be back. Thanks above all for those who contributed. Really appreciate it. Well, I don't do the appreciating. The dogs that do the appreciating. Knowing them, they don't appreciate anything much. Their view is that I'm doing a lousy job, and so the ingratitude comes naturally to them. But I, however, am not like them. I am very grateful for all of your contributions. I do appreciate it. So thank you for today. We'll be back Thursday, the same time. Please join me then. Come with all sorts of questions and comments and observations. It's always very stimulating. So remember, if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.